Good evening, I'm Lisa Zaffer, and welcome to Healing Quest, where we aim to bring you on a better path to health. Tonight, our featured guest speaker is Margaret Buskowski, and she's going to be discussing developing your psychic intuition. Welcome, Margaret.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you.
Could we just start basically and talk about what intuition is and what psychic intuition is in particular?
Sure. What is intuition? My definition of intuition is one's inner guidance, knowing. When you just know something, when you know you shouldn't, when you just have a gut feeling about something, is how I would sort of explain intuition.
So it's not anything with that you can really put your hands on. I mean, that's the basis of intuition.
That's how I basically, that's how I would talk about intuition. You know, if I had to define it based off my experience, I would say your intuition is kind of your gut feeling about things. You know, your gut instinct is kind of your intuition. You know, or you had a feeling that it's such an abstract thing, in the sense that it's hard to kind of wrap your fingers around. But it's important. So give me a second. I'm gonna try. So. I think people understand what I say when I mean it's a gut feeling. It's an instinct. It's a found opportunity. You don't know how. You can't quite explain yourself. That's how I would quantify.
If you
intuition.
had to put it.
Yeah.
Now, it seems like certain people have strong intuition and certain people are not in touch with their intuition. Are there ways that you feel you could tap into your intuition better or strengthen it if you're one of those people who doesn't feel as strong?
Sure. I think the people that I find that are more intuitive are the people who are self-aware and self-conscious of themselves and dedicated to sort of bettering themselves as human beings are generally the people that I find have a stronger sense of intuition for whatever reason. Now, whether it's they have a strong intuition, therefore they are bettering themselves, or because they better themselves, therefore have intuition, I don't know.
Which came first? Yeah. Right. So who can practice psychic intuition particularly?
Psychic intuition. There are different forms of psychic capacity, okay? You can be an empath, you can... There are different, you know, sympathetic, there are many different forms, clairvoyant, clairaudient. And it's my understanding that each of those has a different vibration. Everyone is pretty much empathetic. I mean, I don't know if have you ever read like a newspaper article and you read something tragic and you started crying? You're empathetic for that person.
Absolutely.
That's having empathy. You know, you can read people's emotions, you know, and you're sympathetic about a situation. And then when you start talking, and all of those things can fall under being a psychic and being intuitive. I was trained as, and I'm still trained always, as a clairvoyant. And basically, it was explained to me, and it's been my experience, that you start moving away from the emotions, and you start getting more into principle and more spiritual-oriented vibrations than you would the more earthbound emotional vibrations.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of. I know I'm just trying to process what you're saying. It's new.
Feel free to stop me, and I could backtrack all of those things. So, okay, let me explain that.
Why don't you give us
because
examples?
that's the, sort of the foundation of the topic. Emotions aren't always true. There isn't necessarily truth in emotions. It's your reaction to your perception.
That's very interesting.
Do you know what I'm saying? There is a truth somewhere in there, and there are different vibrations. So my analysis of my upset is based on what I believe to be the case. Therefore, a reaction has occurred. You know, I've reacted somehow, whether it's I'm emotional, I've chosen to not be emotional, depending on, are you following me? So it's like
more
based
about
on
figuring out your choice and reaction and discovering
that's
the truth?
no, that's
or
the
is that what you
level.
do?
I'm trying to break this down. The level of I know
Okay.
I stop me if I'm going off on some weird tangent, but basically, for example, we'll back up. If somebody, an empath picks up on someone's emotions. Let's stay with an empath for right now, okay? Okay, let's say I'm the empathetic person to you. You are very upset right now. You are crying. You're hysterical. Or vice versa. You're the empath. I'm the person who's very upset. I am crying because X, Y, and Z. Okay? X, Y, and Z are a result of my brain in the sense of my brain isn't causing my emotions, but whatever I'm feeling, you know, with the loss, or I'm having a reaction to a thought that I've had, or I'm perceiving a situation to be the case. Therefore, my emotions are reacting accordingly. You know, there are different variations. That's being empathetic, being able to sort of analyze that and talk about it. When you start developing your psychic abilities, you know, or somebody's training you, or you train, it's best to always have somebody train you, but people who are natural or have a natural raw talent for it are going to kind of seek this information out themselves. But it's best to have somebody kind of guiding you. Anyway, there are different levels. So a clairvoyant sort of surpasses the emotional state. There are certain levels that one can read on. And you optimally want a reading from somebody who's clairvoyant because they are transcending the emotional environment of your current state rather than just telling you what it is.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, actually.
Okay.
I like the way you explained it. Now, who can practice? You talk about raw talent. Is it just people who feel, who know? I mean, is that how they get involved, or is there a way of developing it, say, that you don't start out with as much raw talent?
I don't know if somebody starts off with, I don't really know the answer to your question in terms of how much raw talent does somebody have, or if it changes. I believe that people who are naturally drawn to sort of psychic information or capacity have a talent for it. Developing it is a totally different issue than having a talent for it. For example, when I was training, and again, it's an ongoing thing, similar to being a Reiki practitioner. It's just an ongoing thing. You never sort of arrive at this point. Oh my gosh, I almost just lost my train of thought. So somebody can have a raw talent, and then they develop for it. For example, I was much more of a visionary, okay? So therefore I was clairvoyant, and some people are clairaudient, they can hear better, hear messages. That's something that was not something that I was excelled at. That was something that I had to constantly train in and have somebody train me on. It just wasn't something that came naturally to me. I'm a visionary. That's my raw talent, but you kind of learn the laws, if you will, of how to get your hands on it and channel it appropriately. So you're taking all this information that somebody who has raw talent is. When you start developing your skills, you hone in on it and you can channel it more effectively without wasting, the energy that it took, the kinetic energy, if you will, it took to formulate that one thought.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there are many different forms of intuition. How do you know which form you have? How
would you know? By knowing what they are. For example, if you're empathetic or sympathetic, do you have ESP? Can you read people's minds type thing? Like, if people start talking and you knew that was going to come out of their mouth, you probably have more of an aptitude for ESP. If you're totally sensitive to other people's emotions, you're probably empathetic. These are certain things. If you totally have strong visions, you're psychic. It's the whole vision, the third eye. Those are things that you'll know that you have an aptitude for in that area. You'll have to be careful if you start hearing voices. The white coats might come and get you. So I'm just kidding. Well, actually, I'm not. So I won't touch that subject.
You're really funny. Now, is there anything that kind of brings me to another thought I was thinking about? when you are with someone, is there anything that you sometimes don't translate or you don't feel you want to share? Or could you explain a little bit about how?
Sure.
a session works?
When I was training and when I train, it's almost like learning a different language in the sense that it was explained to me, and it has been my understanding that when you start reading as a clairaudient, there's no judgment is sort of missing from the picture. You don't judge. Should I or shouldn't I? You know, people will sometimes want to ask, like, should I take this job here? What should I do? There's no response. You know, there's no judgment. Am I bad? Am I good? Like, there's no real response. And what I've translated that to mean is the universe doesn't care. It cares about our intent. You know, it's sort of what you put out there comes back to you type thing. So it'll register intent, but should and shouldn't I? It's in, negative situations aren't really registered.
Now, do you think people tend to listen when there's a conflict between their head and their intuition? How do people often reconcile it? Do you think that, do you see a lot of situations where, I know it's kind of a confusing question,
No.
Are there a lot of situations where people go totally against their intuition, and what tends to happen to them as a person because of that? I mean, I know you said there's not really a judgment, but...
What would happen to somebody who was in their mind, completely analytical and non-intuitive?
Exactly, right.
I don't really know.
Yeah.
Because I believe that whatever your art form is, I would say, well, that person, is analytical for a reason, and I would honor that person's right to be analytical. So I wouldn't necessarily, what are they missing? That's their talent. They're analytical.
Okay. And now,
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I guess sometimes...
Now, if the people are getting conflicting information, my gut says do this, but my head's telling me not to.
Your gut, is that your intuition? Always?
Yeah, like when I'm using the word gut, like my intuition, my instinct is telling me to do this, but my mind is telling me don't do it. Depending on the situation, and if it's a safe, within the parameters, normal situation that we're using the example of, I would say I would gear people towards using their intuition because it's my way of demonstrating faith. So that's what I'm more geared towards. So if somebody said my head is telling me don't do X, Y, and Z, but my gut is telling me, my instinct is telling me, I know that that's wrong. I know that that's wrong in terms of what their mind's telling them, or I know that it's right, whatever the circumstance may be. I believe that that's sort of our fate calling us.
It's very interesting. So is it possible for anyone to train, or do you think it's more beneficial for somebody to have a session with someone who is an intuitive to help?
No, I think that people who have an aptitude for it should train. It's kind of like the difference between someone who's, whatever the talent may be. Some people are artists, some people are, writers, poets. Some people are just more intuitive. And if you're intuitive, I think that people should learn about that. That's a part of themselves, it's not there in vain. So I would urge somebody to investigate something like that.
And what is involved in training? Is there only one way to train?
No, there are many, many different ways. And I would stress to people that, people who want to train under me like my style. They're comfortable with me. They know who I am. I'm not out trying to, ever trying to solicit people to train under me. It's usually people that I've worked with under the pretense of as a Reiki practitioner with them. They're sometimes my clients, and they're comfortable with me, and they know me, and they understand my philosophy. But I would always urge somebody to seek it. Either go to Borders or any of these bookstores. There's tons around Chicago.